Hi guys, it's Ellen Brock, novel editor. Today we have a very special video because I had the opportunity to interview literary agent Lucinda Halpern. So Lucinda Halpern is a literary agent with over 15 years experience securing book deals with Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, HarperCollins, Hachette Macmillan, and she is the author of Get Signed, Find an Agent, Land a Book Deal, and Become a Published Author. She represents a range of New York Times and internationally best-selling authors in the categories of business, health, lifestyle, popular science, narrative nonfiction, memoir, and upmarket fiction. Her classes and coaching programs have been taught to hundreds of writers worldwide. You can learn more at lucindaliterary.com, or you can download Lucinda's free author training, and you can follow her on Instagram or Twitter, and I'll put all those links in the description. And if you pre-order her book, Get Signed, by February 5th, then you'll get access to a bunch of bonus content, including behind-the-scenes videos with editors, agents, and authors, and a submission organizer, an author workbook to put her guidance into practice, and the chance to win a 20-minute call with Lucinda. So make sure to check out that link for the pre-order in the description if any of that interests you. And now on to my interview with Lucinda. So hi, Lucinda, welcome.
Hi.
For being here. So I have questions from my Patreon subscribers. They're really excited to get to ask an agent a question because we do not get to talk about this stuff a lot. So the first question is, what advice would you give a brand new author who's just started looking for an agent? What are some things that might help them find an agent that's a good fit for them?
Sure. So the advice has always been to look at the acknowledgments of a book that you admire and that influenced you, and then go directly to that agent, because agents, much like most people, love flattery and love a personal letter, and they know when they're getting slushed, right? So, you know, I talk a lot about the common errors you don't want to make as a way of being instructive. And you don't want to make the error of just slushing someone who does not specialize in your category. So acknowledgments could be the first place to look. Then, of course, there are sites like Agent Query and Query Tracker, Manuscript Wishlist, and those are okay. I wouldn't say they're fully updated at any given point.
Okay.
So Publishers Marketplace is really going to be your go-to resource. I don't know if your fans are familiar with it, but it requires a pretty small paid subscription, and through that you can find direct email addresses, what are the deals they've done, what is the agency all about. It gives you so much more real-time information, and direct contact is super important. So, you know, and then any referral you can find into the industry. If you're writing fiction but you know someone who's written a parenting book, and you just say, hey, can I grab just a line to your editor, 5-minute call, that's going to be more helpful to you than anything, just getting in somehow, some way.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So yeah, I think Query Tracker is what a lot of people would think to go to first, but it's good to know that it's not necessarily up to date. And I have noticed that on there, that sometimes it just doesn't seem like it has the latest information. So,
or when a writer, just to keep going on this, when a writer says, I found you on Query Tracker, it's like big whoop. But if they said, I read Chris Bailey's Hyperfocus, and I think it's, it totally changed my life, and so you are the agent I want, it makes a huge difference, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, anyone can go on Query Tracker. You can get, I don't know, 200, 300 agents off there for really anything. So yeah, that's interesting. So how polished should a manuscript be before submitting? So people have heard everything from, they'll help you finish editing it to it should be ready to go on the shelf. So do you have an idea of when you can know when you're ready to submit?
Sure. I mean, I think we're in a market where the manuscript should be 85% publishable. We're not expecting it to be 100.
Right.
It's never 100 by the time it goes to an editor. But I think in working with people like you, it's a really good way for first-timers to work, because we expect to see something that's pretty edited, and not by your husband or your mom, but by an industry professional. And, so again, we all expect to do some development, both the agents and the editors, but it needs to be pretty much there. More than that, I really encourage you to focus on the pitch letter.
Right.
So looking at Amazon descriptions of comparative titles and saying, okay, how did that hook me in? Why did I read it in the first place? why is this what readers are just like thrilled about reading and discussing today? And how can I fit what I'm doing into that is going to inform so much of the very first thing, which is getting someone's attention to even request the manuscript.
Yeah, right.
So I always say, if you're not getting responses to your pitch, it's a problem with your pitch. If you are getting responses and you're asked for the material, but now the line goes dead, it's a problem with your material. So it's a really simple way to understand things. It has nothing to do with your writing. It's just like you didn't break it in the door, you know, for most people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think maybe sometimes writers don't put enough time into the query. They're just sort of hoping that the pages are going to speak for themselves and they won't have to worry too much. But I do think that makes total sense to look for that. So with the comp titles, I know people ask a lot, what's a good comp title? Does it have to be like a New York Times best-selling book? Can it be a little bit more obscure?
Yeah, so that's a great question as well. And we do get into that. I'm just going to hold up the book shamelessly and make sure people know about it. It's called Get Signed, Find an Agent, Mend a Book Deal, and Become a Published Author. And it is for fiction and nonfiction writers, but it talks about comps. I mean, we have a full chapter dedicated to this very nebulous and mysterious topic, because one of the biggest mistakes you can make in a pitch is to not summon comps, right? That's how publishers and Hollywood speak. They're like, it's a this meets that, and you know, or it is the next X, and that's what gets people excited first and foremost. So even if you're not, you know, you're not at New York Times bestselling level yet, you sort of want to step into what you could be seen as. So in terms of finding the perfect one, there's no way to really get this wrong. I think that if you find a mixture of something that is not huge, like I don't want to see the next Harry Potter, you know, it's the next Twilight, it's been done to death, or like current fantasy series, you know, Game of Thrones, or these are ones that we see all the time, unless you're pairing that with something that is more reasonable and specific as to what you're writing. And even better, tell us why. Because often in that pitch letter, we don't have a sense of the writing, and we don't have a sense of, you know, what happens in the book. So you can be very specific. You can say it's got the lyrical prose of X, or it's got the thrilling suspense of Y. Really paint that picture for us.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So it's almost like a shorthand for what you could expect the plot to be, or what you could expect the writing to be, and just it gives you this more immediate sense of what to expect versus trying to explain in the query. You really can't give that clear of a picture of what the writing might be like, say, or what the tone might be like, or.
And well, you can. I mean, that's the other myth. It's like people are so formal and focused on the presentation, sometimes speaking in the third person. These are just errors. I would encourage you to just speak in your voice. The authentic voice and sensibility you have as a writer is going to be so much more appealing to your recipient. They're going to get a set. I can tell in an email if someone is a gifted writer.
Yeah.
They're doing this like formal synopsis that they've been trained on whatever writing site or program. That's not what we want to see. You know, I conducted 20 interviews for Get Signed, and the editors were echoing this. They want to see not the presentation, but the writing talent and the sensibility and the voice right there in the pitch.
Okay, so would you say that's like a major flaw or a common flaw in queries?
I think so. I mean, I get a stilted, you know, synopsis, and I'm immediately like we call it mego. My eyes are glazing over. Again, these are just, you know, things in the industry that people say. It's hard to then get into it because I just don't feel like I'm having an intimate conversation. A query letter is supposed to open a conversation.
Okay.
And that begins with that personal intro, and then it goes into more the why this book now, and less the this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened, or you know, another mistake people make is they characterize their own writing a rivetingness and a you know, it's a heart-rending plot. It's like, great, but why?
Yeah.
What actually happened in this book? Who am I
Yeah.
rooting for? Who looks like me? You know, where is it transporting me?
Okay. Yeah. So with the query, are you really looking for someone who has a big platform? Because I've had a lot of concerns from people, writers who feel like my platform's not big enough, and should I be focusing on social media and building up a platform
Yeah.
before querying?
So I spoke with a great fiction agent for Get Signed, and she echoed what I thought to be the case. I spoke with an editor at Knopf as well, who's saying the same thing. It's like, it's all about what's on the page. It is not, it's not really about your platform for fiction, and that's the very encouraging news. It's fantastic if you have the YouTube channel and the Instagram and like, you know, if you've written previously, if you've won awards, I think that that still does carry weight if you've done an MFA with a prestigious program, or you've won awards, or you've really like proved your chops as a writer by recognition. That's important. And any bit of Google presence you can have in your favor. You know, I tell writers, create a website. They're thinking, I'm going to do that when I'm an author. Once I have the contract, or once the book is on route. I'm like, no, you can curate what agents and editors see by Googling you, which is the first thing we're going to do if we're interested, just by developing a really simple website. So that's something that people are surprised to learn. So the platform aspect really is not as important, which actually is encouraging and discouraging because it puts so much more weight on the writing.
Right.
You
Yeah,
know?
that's true.
In nonfiction, it's sort of like the writing is tertiary. It's is there an idea and a platform? And we can find the writer, we can pair you with a great writer, we can help you with that. But with fiction, you just can't cut it without great writing.
Right. So when it comes to the writing itself, are you looking for everything, like every duck to be in a row, or would you be more willing to say, you know, that maybe the plot's not perfect yet, or maybe the voice isn't perfect yet, or are you really looking for, you know, everything to be basically completely there?
Yeah, I'd be really specific about that. I don't need the plot to be perfect. I need the voice to be pretty dead on. I think
Okay.
every editor and agent is attracted to voice. First and foremost, did they connect with the voice? Did they connect with the characters? That sort of comes organically, naturally for a creative writer. It's not something you can kind of learn in, you know, maybe you can. I wasn't an MFA, but I think that that sort of comes from within you, whereas plot can be refined with editorial help.
Right.
So you've got to have that right and focus on those opening pages, because keep in mind that agents and editors are reading to pass. That's how I always describe it. They're like, not hooked, okay, done.
Yeah.
If they even get that far and request the manuscript because your pitch letter intrigued them. So get us into this, be immersive right away.
Okay. Yeah, so with freelance editing, I always like tell people like I can't make you a voice, like I can't create a voice for you. So I think that makes sense because it's like we can work on the plot, we can work on voice, but I can't take something with no voice and fix it. It's just not, it's too much to expect from an editing process. And it sounds like from your perspective, that's too much to try to fix because you're talking about every word, every sentence. It's a lot more than, you know, tweaking exactly what happens in the plot.
Exactly. The plot you can tweak, but the voice, it's got to be there.
All right. Well, that totally makes sense to me. So, so how many agents would you say you should try to query before giving up, before saying this is not
Yeah.
happening?
I mean, never give up, right? I mean, that's what I'm all about. I'm like, how do we keep you motivated and
Yeah.
hopeful? Because writing is a long road, like whether you self-publish or you get rejected. I mean, how many famous stories of people got rejected? And like the greats, right? I mean, J.K. Rowling, because we were talking about that a minute ago, you know, one publisher of the 13 saw it.
Yeah.
And I happened to work with the publisher at that time, and they're like, yes, we just kept ourselves in business for like, everyone's getting a bonus, you know.
Yeah.
But can you imagine getting rejected? Like, so if you keep those empowering stories in mind, rejection is not something you cannot be immune to that as a writer or as an agent. So I say try about 10 at a time, like 10 to 15 agents.
Okay.
and see what vital feedback you can get. It is the greatest gift to get a response at all and to get a constructive response. And, you know, I say in Get Signed, I'm like, follow up for that constructive response. Here are some actual questions you can ask to get at what was wrong without making the recipient think too much or feel like they need to flatter you, or like, so you can elicit responses that will actually improve the work. And then you can go back at it either to those agents who expressed interest in it but passed for some reason, which has happened to us at Lucinda Literary plenty of times. People, we give them feedback and they come back a year later and they've done it. And then we're like, you're ready to sign. Great. And they're so thrilled. It paid off, right? So, so get that feedback, rework it, and then go back out to some of those agents and to some more, and just keep going in rounds is how I would encourage it. Yeah.
So you kind of touched on another question that someone had, which was if you already submitted and you were rejected and you resubmit, are they really going to look at it again, or have they written you off?
No, I mean, it is not, there is no closed door. Again, I talk about the 4 types of writers who get book deals in my book, and we have one called The Crusader, and they just see every door. And I'm one of these people, by the way. I feel like that's an agent quality too. So, you know, no door is closed. What is the worst you can hear if you bother someone with your pitch again and they say I've seen this, or they don't respond? It's like, they don't have the time to be mean to you. If they do, you don't want to be in business with them. You don't want to be in business with a mean agent. You know, we know how, or we should know how hard you're working at this and admire that effort. So you can go back with something. And again, better to do that if you've actually been in a conversation. Mm-hmm. But even if you haven't gotten a response the first time, maybe someone didn't even see it.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to tell your audience right now, the time to query us or the time to query me is a Sunday night, because my inbox is like flooded. You know, a long weekend, a holiday, a Sunday night, I'm looking as everything quiets down and I don't have to deal with the triage of my inbox. If something interesting comes in and I'm like, okay, I think I'll just take a peek and get back to this writer.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. Am I going to elicit like 2,000 queries?
You've ruined it now.
That's okay. I want to find, you know, we all want to find the next great writer, and we have so much hope and optimism for new talent. That's another thing that I discovered in these interviews for Get Signed. It's like every editor I spoke with, no matter how seasoned, every agent, we still take on first-time writers. We're excited by that.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think a lot of writers seem to feel like that's not true, to feel like it's the same writers getting published over and over, that you're not looking for new voices. And so I think it's good to hear that that's not true. At least it's not your perspective on things, because I do hear that a lot, that they just don't want new voices, or they just want to keep publishing those sure thing books where they know that author's always going to sell. So
yes, it's hard. I'm not going to lie to your audience. Like, it is hard, but people get excited about first-time author. And actually the people who are more, where it's riskier is if you've published a first book and that first book has not performed sales-wise, it's harder to sell that second book, especially at a good level. So yeah, that makes sense. So, so how do you think then an author should handle rejection? I mean, you mentioned, and I know I saw in your book, you mentioned some questions that you could ask after the query, maybe to try to like get a sense of where to go from there. So would you generally say keep working, or would you say there's a point where you should take a rejection and say, maybe, oh my gosh, I just dropped my microphone. Would you say there's a point where you might say, just give up on the project? Or would you always say, keep going? It just depends on what your vision is and how much self-belief you have. Again, the more constructive criticism you can get, because the market does think in trends. If you're hearing the same thing or you're not getting a response, it's like there probably is some vital tweak that you need to make. But the rejection just shouldn't daunt you if you really believe in what you're going with. The beauty of fiction writers is you probably have a lot of ideas for books. So I meet with a lot of fiction writers through our classes who are just saying, okay, I've tried for a year, but I have this other idea. And I'm like, go pursue that. That's what you are burning to write. So
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with like shelving something. And then if you sell the first project, you might find a relationship that says, all right, now we're ready to see that second book.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, so maybe that's not your debut
Yeah,
sometimes.
it's often not your debut, what you're first working on.
Yeah.
You can be thinking in other genres, like we have fiction writers who then transition over to memoir. They're debating, is this memoir? Is this autofiction? Is this, what is this? And they need that break. Like they need to continue being creative because that's what we all need to do as writers. Yeah.
So is there anything on the first page that's like a huge turn off, like an instant no? And is there anything that's like an instant, like, this is definitely what I'm looking for?
In fiction, I mean, it so depends on the genre and the book. Hard to make that something universal. I think if you just stick with the have to grip us immediately,
Mm-hmm.
a great scene, like don't take too long to build it up.
Yeah.
I don't know what genres many of your writers are writing in, but I recently read the book Wellness, quite a long book. But that first scene, I still feel really moved by. And I think we can all think of books that, the books that we loved probably hooked us with the first scene.
Yeah. That's true. And I think you mentioned voice, and I would imagine that's some more or less instant first page. You're like, the voice is there, the voice is not there.
Yes, yeah, yes. And if it feels like rote and formulaic or overwrought or, just sort of obvious amateur writing, I can again spot it pretty immediately when you spend over a decade doing this and seeing the gems, seeing the diamond in the rough, or just saying like, this person for this particular work doesn't quite have the talent. And that's okay. Maybe there's something else you will have talent in writing.
Right. And then you can improve. And I'm always like encouraging people to keep working on your basic skills, because I think a lot of time it can be those basic, how to make a sentence that conveys a point that's understandable, because sometimes I think people might have big ideas, but that more just how to write the sentences, how to write the paragraphs can be missing, even when maybe they are very creative, their ideas might be good. Sometimes it is like just sort of that basic level.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not where it needs to be.
Yeah, exactly. And again, like a more formulaic approach that I use in Get Signed, which I think it may not even be mine. It's probably something that was taught in writing school, but it did occur to me. It's the 5 W's, like the who, what, where, why, when.
Mm-hmm.
If you anchor, or and Patchett said, every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's that simple. If you're not thinking with those greater, it seems so simple, but it's not. When a writer is just kind of getting immersed in their own world and their characters, they forget to anchor to those plot points or those requirements of fiction. So this, we're smiling because this very well.
It's
but
true.
This is a hope. Like, how do we help writers, right?
It can be difficult, and sometimes a lot of things can be not working, but at the same time there's a lot of potential, or a lot of things are working, and I think it can be hard in terms of maybe querying too early. Sometimes maybe people aren't as far along as they think they are in their book, so maybe they need to spend another year, another 2 years. It's just not quite there yet, and I think maybe there's a pressure to want to query too soon, because everybody wants to be published. So
exactly. And workshopping is so key. I mean, I'll often turn writers away and say, go workshop this and then come back to me, or go hire an editor. And, if you're able to, just do whatever you can to get that professional feedback.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is a question that you can answer necessarily, but I know, so some writers were expressing interest in how much work in marketing would a publisher do, because they get the impression now they sort of expect the writer to do the marketing. And does that sort of check out with how you've experienced things?
It does. I mean, again, I do a lot of nonfiction personally, and so that's very much the case, right? I mean, I can tell you that this is what I would say. A publisher is providing you the gift of producing and distributing your book. These are things you cannot do on your own, right? Beyond that, again, if you think of it as a gift and an investment, a risk that they are taking, then it gets a lot simpler and less personal to think about all the things they aren't doing for you and to begin reciprocating that gift because you will all want the same thing, right? And many novelists want to write more books. So they do have, again, if you're working with the big five, you've got the marketing and PR departments, you'll have an assigned publicist and marketer, and they're doing the basic seeding of the book with their contacts. And that it sort of ends there, like right after publication, a week out, they're kind of like, you're on your own now. And it sort of starts up a little late for writers too. 3 months or 4 months, sort of not enough time to build the runway for a writer who's launching their work. I always say the easiest way to think about it is like you turn in your finished manuscript, it goes into production, so this is to your publisher, and then it's all about marketing for you. It's like, go take your little vacation, come back, and now it's all about marketing. It's in their hands. And so anything you can do to support that book is really important. But it isn't like publishers do nothing because, again, they are providing your book with the editing, the design, the production, and the distribution, the foreign rights, whatever they're handling for you. That is not feasible on your own if you want to get traditionally published.
Right. And I think some writers, maybe they feel a little bit daunted because it's not how they visualize spending their time as a writer. They didn't visualize spending that time doing marketing. And I think that's daunting.
It is, and it is something, again, I talk about it in Get Signed. I'm kind of a marketing nerd. I like it. I think that there is a way for every writer to feel less intimidated and to find the platform that works for them. So plenty of writers don't like to be all over social media, but I find that if you are a creative writer, you may not mind writing a newsletter or posting that newsletter on your blog, having this kind of private community of readers who love you and follow you versus like the haters that live on Twitter. So you find the platform that works for you and you really milk that to find your audience. You don't have to be everywhere and anywhere scattered,
Okay. Yeah. And I think maybe people feel that pressure that it's like, okay, you have to have an Instagram and you have to have a TikTok and you have to have YouTube and a Facebook group and all that. And I think it can spread too thin and maybe that's not the best strategy ultimately anyway.
I will say though, because I'm doing this now, right? Like I'm the agent who is becoming the author, who's doing the experimentation, who's writing the playbook as we go, and I'm doing all the things, all the social media things, and I'm hating it. I'm not hating it. So I'm doing these AMAs on Instagram. I don't know by the time how long I'm going to be doing those for, but it's so amazing because I'm actually connecting with writers. Getting real-time, because I could do this all day. I love guiding writers, and I'm meeting them, and then they're querying me, and I know their names, and I'm following them, so I feel like I know them personally. And they know me personally. We're connecting, and the social media awareness, like the amplification of whatever it is you're doing, is crazy. It really does work, even with a very small following. So now I'm pretty dedicated to overcoming my own fear and sticking with it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I get that. Like, I actually am not a big social media person at all. So I have this YouTube channel, but it's definitely not, I think, a lot of our comfort zone. I think a lot of people, we get into books, we're more comfortable behind a keyboard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think, for everybody, it's a little, take some getting used to get into like the marketing side of things. So that makes sense. So I have a couple of more specific questions. Somebody said they are playing around with formatting, like with fonts and alignment and spacing as like a creative choice. And how do they make sure that comes across as intentional and not as mistakes or, poor formatting.
I mean, that's all about how you present it in your pitch, right? That's not something you want to surprise an agent or publisher with. It's something you want to set up properly.
Okay.
But then it's not going to be a deal breaker by any stretch. I mean, we'll probably admire the ambition in it if it works.
Okay, yeah. So someone else said they are writing a historical upmarket fiction, and they wanted to know, firstly, do you agree that upmarket fiction is a subgenre of fiction that incorporates elements of page-turning mainstream fiction while still showcasing the more nuanced prose and complex character development more often found in literary fiction?
Wait, start with the opening of that question again.
So they wanted to know, firstly, they're writing historical upmarket fiction, and so they were wondering, is that a thing? Is there historical upmarket?
Yeah, of course.
And then also they want to know, do you agree with that definition of upmarket fiction as being sort of incorporating mainstream fiction elements with more like literary fiction elements?
I think that's exactly what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I think of. So more commercially accessible, but with that literary feel to it.
Okay, because I think this was more specific, but I've gotten a lot of questions over the years of people saying, is this upmarket? Is this not upmarket? And I think it's hard to say. I think it's hard for people to analyze that in their own work. Is there anything someone could do to sort of assess if their book qualifies as upmarket?
But here's the hack, right? You're asking these questions. Your writers are asking these questions, which are very valid, very good questions. But if you haven't hooked the agent or the publisher yet on the actual book, it sort of doesn't matter. Like, they can help refine the categorization with you. But if so I do upmarket fiction, for example. It can veer more on the commercial side. I think literary fiction is very tough to pull off. I love reading it, but it's very tough to pull off. So in your pitch letter to an agency that does upmarket and commercial, you call yours that. You're taking that leap of faith, and that's what's getting us interested, because we're seeing there's a fit. Then we're requesting it, we're reading it, we're like, this is a little more literary, but I love it. It's not a problem. But to focus on these things too soon before you're actually targeting the recipients that you want to go to. A lot of more sophisticated writers will actually know the publishing imprints that they see this publishing with, and that actually gives agents a great sense. To present them with, I see on Publishers Marketplace that you do deals with Strauss and Groot, Knopf, I'm just naming Doubleday, whatever, and and I see this book as sitting on their list, and I know you have those relationships. It's like, suddenly this is a much more personal, sophisticated conversation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So aside from upmarket specifically, I think a lot of writers can spend a lot of time sort of obsessing about, is this technically science fiction? Is this technically horror? But ultimately you're saying, if you get the genre wrong, it's not the end of the world. They're not going to like kick you out the door and say, you don't know your genre. So
it's a great book, or it isn't. And we will spot that, we will spot that, or the right person will spot that for you and share your vision, and then they'll work on the categorization, and that might continue to evolve as you get a publisher involved.
Okay. Let's see. So, so are there genres that you would say, or subgenres that you would say are more publishable currently, and maybe some genres that people aren't really looking for anymore?
So I'll offer this more in sort of a trend sense than a genre sense, but the order of the day is more diverse voices and stories. And so if you are exploring LGBTQ themes, or themes related to race, you're having some like sort of interesting personality, and of course that's delicate too, right? If you don't come from that background, to speak to it can be tricky. That's where research comes into play, and sensitivity readers, and all sorts of ways to do that. But I think what that does in great fiction and nonfiction alike is it takes us into a lesser known world, or it's more inclusive in a way than what's been said before. And I think that can be important. It's not everything, right? I think that the more gripping and cinematic, the better. So when we're reading fiction, we're reading it for film. That's the greatest sort of payoff that takes this book from small scale to huge scale, big name, small name to big name. And so if it doesn't have that engrossing cinematic, like you can envision the movie trailer and here's what happens, this is widely applicable for any genre you're writing in. Those are kinds of the universals, I would say, and I'm sure I'll think of more after this interview. In terms of what people don't want to see, you know, the ultra interior work of fiction or book generally, which just like doesn't keep you engaged because you're living too much in someone's head. And worse, the amateur error of like, we know this is your story and you're not really world building for us here because we're living in your head. Something that is like too dark and painful. So I'm all for dark humor, satire, like a dark mystery, fantastic, right? That's more in vogue than ever. But if there's no sense of escaping into something, either being thrilled by it or laughing along with it, like humor cannot be underestimated. Humor is just great in any sort of genre if you can make us laugh. But it, you know, again, keeping us glued to our seat, whatever that genre is.
Okay. I had heard that there's a little bit more of a trend towards escapism more recently, that people are looking a little more for a place that you'd want to be versus a place that you wouldn't want to be. So we had a long era of like dystopian, like, you know, a horrible, like societies you would never want to live in, and that the trend now is maybe a little bit more towards
that's
something pleasant.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right, because we all feel our world is increasingly dystopian and it's painful. This has sort of been coming as of the pandemic. It's yeah, we want to escape into something lighter, and you know, the attention span is getting smaller and smaller. You're competing against Netflix and free podcasts and social media. It's like, so I'd be short and sweet, sparing in your prose, and really get to what those payoffs are for the reader, which is an odd term to use, but if you're not thinking about your reader with what you write and what they're getting out of it, not just what's important to you, then you've really sort of like cracked the code.
So with the shorter attention spans, do you find our books trending shorter or not particularly?
Well, that's a funny thing, because I just picked up a book called The Bee Sting, which has been highly acclaimed and everyone's recommending it. And I mentioned a minute ago that I read Wellness, and that was a tome and I loved it. And Tomorrow is not so short, and Covenant of Water is hugely long. So I would actually say that these like massive fiction, people feel a great sense. My guess is, yes, they have to be engrossed all the time, but they also feel, what's the latest Barbara Demon Copperhead, they also feel a great sense of accomplishment when they've read it. And I think that is great. But if you're looking for like a beach read and on the plane, nothing wrong with a shorter paperback, and the price point's nicer. So I think it depends on the mood. And as always, it depends on the book and what that book requires. If there's a lot to say, or there's just not that much to say and you should read in one sitting.
Right, so it should be as long as it needs to be.
As it requires, yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. But I can say in nonfiction, the trend is shorter.
Okay. Do you have a personal upper and lower word count where to you a novel's definitely too short or definitely too long, or do you sort of just play it by the content or the plot?
Yeah, I have to play it by the content. I mean, I get intimidated when I see something over the 100,000 word level, but that's because I'm a mom of 2 kids, and like, and I'm running a company and I'm launching a book, and it's just sort of overwhelming to think about. But honestly, don't listen to me. First of all, that's subjective to where I am in life, but also if the right thing comes along, I'm reading it. It's like, you should lose track of how long it is if you're really immersed.
Right, you don't want a book that feels like it's excessively long. You don't want to be sitting there like, oh my gosh, this book is just going on and on and on.
And frankly, I know people are told in their career letters to talk about the word count. I'm not actually sure why that's important. When I get that, it's the last thing I look at. I'm looking at like what's happening here, and is this person sounding like they're a writer or someone I'd want to work with?
Okay.
So
So another big struggle is the synopsis.
Yeah.
So do you have any tips for how to write a synopsis, and do you have a length of synopsis that you like?
Yeah. I'd like to see 3 paragraphs in your query letter.
Okay.
The first, 3 to 4, I would say. Like, if you can't get the synopsis into a paragraph, okay, take 2. Is there a specific formula for it? Again, using the 5 W's as your benchmark. It's like, who are we meeting? Where is this happening? What stage in time? Who, what, where, when, why? The why being super important. Like, what's driving these characters, or why this book now, which often does come down to comps, or what's going on in the cultural landscape or conversation. And that's sort of proving the thirst for it, right? So if you stick to those 5 whys, you could probably write a pretty tight synopsis, but run it by your friends and colleagues, people you trust. Look for facial expressions. Where did they get bored? Where did they lose interest? Where are they asking questions? If they're asking questions, it's not as clear as it needs to be in your pitch letter.
Okay. Yeah, I sometimes find when I've looked at queries for clients that I can't understand what they're even trying to say. Like, I don't understand the story, and it's like my feedback is like, I do not know what this is about. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
So I think definitely having somebody else or several other people read it first, even just to say, do you even understand? Like, are you getting it at all? Are you getting the plot at all from this? Because I think it's hard to get that perspective on your own.
Hard. It's really hard. It's like, how many characters do I involve in the synopsis? Because you don't want it to be just one character. You want to paint something of other characters. I'd stick to memorable qualities or plot points. If there's some quirk about the character that people might relate to, that can be really interesting. Amazon descriptions are going to be your best tool. There's a formula to that. What are they doing? How are they grabbing you? How are they speaking to the reader in every sentence, versus, like, again, their internal creative pursuit? It's just going to tell you so much about how to frame your own novel.
Okay. So that is actually all the questions that I had. So is there anything else that you want to say about your book?
Oh, thank you. So I would say, but going back to submissions, we got a lot of like free resources on our website. At the time that people buy this, if they choose to buy this, we have a submission tracker. So this is something our clients have actually used to successfully get agents. It helps you organize sort of like, when did I contact them? Who are they? And like what the next step and follow-up is, quite crucially, because I don't want your query to die on the vine. You try once and you wait to hear back, you get nothing. To me, that's not your shot. Like, you've got to do one sort of follow-up email. So we've got, just in terms of like what's next and what to do from here, of course, checking out Get Signed, super short read, is backed by all of these agents, editors, and authors who've told us about their process of either getting signed or signing up with first-time writers and what sort of sticks out to them, and gives you all of these shortcuts that other people aren't going to tell you, because people want to keep publishing exclusive and mysterious for a reason. Agents are just not making the time to get out there and educate you. They expect you to come and be educated. And I feel like that's the greatest problem I've been looking to solve since I started Lucinda Literary. It's like, I don't want writers to be in the dark anymore. Yeah. So that's what I'd say about the book. It is not about craft. That's what you're here for.
Right, yeah.
It's about how you present your craft in a way that's compelling. So
it sounds, and I did read it before we interviewed, and it was very it was very interesting. I did like that you talked about the 4 different writer who get published, because I think sometimes we feel like we have to be good at everything, or we have to, wear every hat. And I did like that it was sort of capitalizing on strengths, because I'm always with craft too. I'm always talking about capitalizing on what you're good at.
Yes,
you can't all be good at everything. So
thank you for doing that. I mean, it's absolutely, that is the best way to think about yourself. I mean, so many, like one of the writers who interviewed for this says, I have nothing original to say. I mean, that's what she was always plagued by, that imposter syndrome, which so many people have, never going to be good enough. Or conversely, there are so many like crap books on the market. Why are they publishing these? You know, it's sort of, it becomes too hate, you know, don't be a hater. Right. So find what it is that your strength is, and really lean into that. And that's what should come forth in your query letter. So yeah, we have a lot on the 4 types of writers who get book deals, but you will be at least one of them.
Well, it's a very uplifting message. I know a lot of, so many writers do feel like they just don't see it ever happening for them for whatever reason. Even maybe their book's great and they still, for some reason, they have this mental block where they're like, I'm never going to be good at marketing. I'm never going to be able to pitch myself, or I'm never going to be able to do whatever, aspect of it. So
yeah,
I think there being different approaches for different writers, I think is important. We're not all the same, and we don't all have the same strengths. So
yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I thought that was great.
There is no, honestly, for fiction more than anything, there is just no one way to get this right. And again, focus on your craft, getting the most perfect book, focus on getting the best editor or sort of trusted eye to critique you. I did for my book like a reader's survey. So I tapped about 15 people I really trusted of different, my readers, right? Not my mother. My mother reads New Yorker. This is a self-help book. And I said, like, point me to what's not working so that you don't have to feel like you have to flatter and compliment me. And I'd encourage, after using this tool successfully, that writers can do that themselves before getting an agent. So focus on your craft, get the trusted feedback, find whatever your strength is, and really focus on that presentation more than anything to get someone hooked in a conversation.
Well, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ella, and appreciate it.
Another huge thank you to Lucinda Halpern for taking the time to answer questions today. If you have any questions for Lucinda, you can, of course, leave them in the comments. And if you want to get more tips and tricks for landing an agent from Lucinda Halpern, you can check out her new book, Get Signed. And if you pre-order by February 5th, you get all of that great bonus material, the workbook, the submission organizer, and behind the scenes videos. If you liked this interview and you want to help support the channel, a link to my Patreon is in the description. I will be back with a new video in a few weeks. And in the meantime, happy writing, guys.